In December 1918, the war had just ended. American supply depots across France were packing up, sending soldiers home, closing bases. Private Charles Monroe worked the night shift at Supply Depot 12. His job was simple: sort uniforms, pack equipment, inventory supplies. But on December 14th, he went into the uniform storage building at 11 p.m. to retrieve a jacket. What he saw there, standing in the corner, perfectly still, changed everything he thought he knew about reality. Before he died in 1971, Charles told his son what happened that night. This is that story. December 14th, 1918, northern France. The war had been over for exactly 1 month. The armistice was signed. The fighting stopped. Now came the enormous task of packing up and going home. Supply Depot 12 sat 3 miles outside a small French town. It was a collection of warehouses and storage buildings surrounded by a fence. Nothing glamorous, just rows of buildings filled with equipment, supplies, uniforms, weapons, everything an army needed. Private Charles Monroe was 26 years old. He'd been in France for 14 months, but he wasn't a combat soldier. He worked supply and logistics. His job was keeping track of inventory, making sure equipment got where it needed to go. Since the armistice, his job had changed. Now, instead of distributing supplies, they were collecting them, packing everything up, preparing to ship it all back to America or dispose of it. Charles worked the night shift, midnight to 8 a.m. The depot was quieter at night, easier to work without constant interruptions from officers needing supplies or transport trucks arriving with deliveries. He usually worked with 2 other soldiers, but tonight, both had been reassigned to help with vehicle maintenance. Charles was alone, 8 hours, by himself, in a depot with 30 buildings spread across 5 acres. He didn't mind. He actually preferred working alone. It was peaceful. Just him, his clipboard, and endless rows of supplies to inventory. His assignment tonight was Building 7, the uniform storage building. 3,000 square feet of nothing but military uniforms. Jackets, pants, boots, helmets. All organized by size and type. All waiting to be packed into crates and shipped home. Charles arrived at Building 7 at 23:30 hours, 11:30 p.m. He unlocked the door, turned on the lights. The building was one large open room, high ceiling, concrete floor, rows and rows of shelving units holding uniforms. The building was cold. France in December was freezing. The storage buildings had no heating. Charles could see his breath. He pulled his coat tighter and got to work. His task was simple: count uniforms in Section A, verify the inventory matched the records, mark discrepancies on his clipboard. Standard procedure. He'd done this hundreds of times. He started at the far left corner, working methodically. Count, check, note. Count, check, note. The work was boring, but necessary. He'd been working for maybe 30 minutes when he first felt it. That sensation of being watched. That prickling feeling on the back of your neck when you sense someone's looking at you. Charles stopped counting, turned around, looked at the empty building behind him. Nobody there. Just rows of uniforms hanging on racks. Just shadows between the shelving units. Just his imagination. He returned to his work. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger, more insistent. Someone was watching him. He was certain of it. He turned around again, walked down the center aisle, looking between the rows, checking behind the shelving units, calling out, "Hello? Is someone here?" No response. Just silence. Just the sound of his own footsteps echoing in the empty building. Charles shook his head. "You're being ridiculous," he muttered to himself. "Nobody's here. Get back to work." He returned to his section, started counting again, trying to ignore the feeling. But at exactly midnight, something changed. The temperature dropped. Suddenly, dramatically. Charles's breath became visible clouds. His fingers started going numb. And then he heard it. From the far corner of the building, a sound like fabric rustling, like someone putting on a jacket. Charles froze, listened. The sound came again. Definitely fabric. Definitely movement. "Who's there?" he called out. "This building is restricted. Identify yourself." No response. But the rustling continued, slow, deliberate, like someone was getting dressed. Charles grabbed his flashlight, walked toward the sound, his heart racing, his hands shaking slightly. He reached the corner where the sound was coming from, pointed his flashlight into the shadows between two tall shelving units. And that's when he saw it, standing in the corner, perfectly still, facing away from him. A uniform, a complete military uniform, jacket, pants, boots, standing upright, as if someone was wearing it. But nobody was wearing it. The uniform was empty, standing on its own, perfectly straight, arms at its sides, like a soldier at attention. Charles stared at it, his brain trying to process what he was seeing, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe someone had put the uniform on a mannequin. Maybe it was just hanging on some kind of stand he couldn't see in the shadows. But no. As he looked closer, he could see there was nothing supporting it. No mannequin, no stand, no wire frame, just the uniform, standing by itself. Impossible. Charles stood there for maybe 30 seconds, frozen, staring at the impossible thing in front of him. The uniform didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, empty, silent, wrong. "This is ridiculous," Charles said aloud, his voice shaking slightly. "It's just hanging on something I can't see, that's all." He took a step closer, shining his flashlight directly at the uniform, looking for whatever was holding it up. Nothing. No support. No framework. The uniform was standing freely, on its own. Charles reached out, his hand trembling. He needed to touch it, needed to prove this was real, that he wasn't losing his mind. His fingers were inches away when the uniform moved. Not dramatically, just a slight shift. The shoulders rotated, maybe an inch, like someone standing at attention had adjusted their posture slightly. Charles jerked his hand back, took 3 quick steps backward. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. The uniform didn't move again, just stood there. But Charles could swear. He could swear the empty jacket was now facing more toward him than it had been before, like it had turned to look at him. No, that was impossible. Uniforms don't look at people. Uniforms don't move. This was some kind of trick, some kind of prank. Had to be. "Very funny," Charles called out. "Whoever's doing this, you got me. Good joke. You can come out now." No response. The building was silent except for the sound of wind outside. Charles backed away, keeping his eyes on the uniform, expecting it to collapse any second, expecting whoever was controlling it to reveal themselves. But nothing happened. The uniform just stood there. Charles made a decision. He was leaving. Right now. He'd report this to his sergeant in the morning, let someone else deal with it. Whatever this was, prank or malfunction or whatever, it wasn't his problem. He turned toward the door, started walking quickly, Not quite running, but close. Behind him, he heard it. Footsteps. Heavy. Boots on concrete. Following him. Charles stopped. Turned around slowly. The uniform had moved. It was no longer in the corner. It was standing in the center aisle, 20 feet away, still facing his direction. Still empty. Still impossible. And as Charles watched, it took another step. The boots moved. 1 foot forward, then the other. Walking. The empty uniform was walking. No legs inside the pants. No body filling the jacket. Just the shape of a soldier. Moving forward, 1 step at a time. Charles ran, full sprint, toward the door. His flashlight beam bouncing wildly. His breath coming in gasps. Behind him, the footsteps continued, steady, unhurried, following. He reached the door, grabbed the handle, pulled. The door wouldn't open. It was locked, but that was impossible. He'd come in through this door. It locked from the outside. It couldn't be locked from inside. Charles pulled harder, panic rising. The door wouldn't budge. Behind him, the footsteps stopped. Close now, maybe 10 feet away. Charles turned around slowly, his back against the door, his flashlight shaking in his hand. The uniform stood there, in the middle of the aisle. Empty arms at its sides, empty boots on the ground. No head visible above the collar. Just nothing. Absence where a person should be. They stood there, Charles and the empty uniform, staring at each other, though the uniform had nothing to stare with. Charles's voice came out as a whisper. "What are you?" The uniform didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there. Then slowly, the right arm rose. The empty sleeve lifted, extended toward Charles, like someone reaching out, offering a handshake, or pointing. Charles pressed himself against the door. "Stay back. Stay back." The arm remained extended, perfectly still, waiting. Charles looked at it, at the empty sleeve, at the impossible shape that shouldn't exist. And then he noticed something. On the jacket, above the left breast pocket, there was a name tag, sewn into the fabric. He could just barely read it in the dim light. Harrison. That name. He knew that name. Private Harrison. He'd processed that soldier's paperwork 2 months ago. Harrison had died. Gas attack. His body had been shipped home 3 weeks ago. This was Harrison's uniform, the one he died in. Charles felt cold spreading through his chest. Not from the temperature, from understanding. "Harrison," he whispered. Is that you?" The extended arm lowered slightly, like a nod. Like confirmation. The uniform took another step forward, and Charles's vision went black. Charles woke up on the floor, cold concrete against his cheek, daylight streaming through the high windows. He sat up slowly, his head pounding, his body stiff from lying on the cold floor. Building 7. He was still in Building 7. How long had he been unconscious? He checked his watch. 06:47 hours, 6:47 a.m. Almost 7 hours had passed. Charles stood up shakily, looked around the building. Everything looked normal. Rows of uniforms on racks. Everything organized. Nothing out of place. No empty uniform standing in the aisle. No footsteps. No extended arm. Everything exactly as it should be. Had he dreamed it? Had he hallucinated? Maybe he'd fallen and hit his head and imagined everything. But no. He remembered it too clearly, too vividly. The uniform standing by itself, walking. The name tag, Harrison. Charles walked to where the uniform had been standing, the center aisle. Nothing there now. just empty floor. He turned and walked to the corner, where he'd first seen it. There were uniforms here, dozens of them, hanging on racks, organized by size. He checked the name tags, looking for Harrison's. It had to be here somewhere. He found it on the third rack, a jacket with the name Harrison sewn above the pocket. The same jacket he'd seen last night. He was sure of it. But it was just hanging normally now, on a hanger, on a rack. Nothing special about it, just another uniform among thousands. Charles touched it. The fabric was cold, colder than the other uniforms around it. Unnaturally cold. He pulled his hand back. That coldness. It felt wrong. Felt like touching something dead. The door opened behind him. Charles spun around. Sergeant Martinez entered, looked at Charles with concern. "Monroe, what are you doing here? Your shift ended hours ago." Charles's mouth was dry. I fell asleep. I was doing inventory and I don't know. I woke up on the floor. Martinez frowned. "You okay? You look terrible." "I'm fine, just tired." "Did you finish the Section A inventory?" Charles looked at his clipboard, still on the floor where he'd dropped it. "No, Sergeant, I had some problems. Equipment malfunction." "What kind of malfunction?" Charles hesitated. How could he explain? How could he tell his sergeant that he'd seen a uniform walking, that he'd passed out from fear? "My flashlight died," he lied. "I couldn't see to count properly. I'll finish tonight." Martinez studied him. "You sure you're okay? You want me to assign someone else?" "No, I'll finish it, tonight." "All right, get some rest. You look like hell." Martinez left. Charles stood there in Building 7, alone, looking at Harrison's uniform hanging on the rack. Just a uniform, just fabric and buttons. Nothing supernatural, nothing impossible. But Charles knew what he'd seen, and he knew he couldn't tell anyone. They'd think he was crazy, shell-shocked, unfit for duty. So he'd keep it to himself, do his job, finish the inventory, and try to forget what happened. But he knew he'd never forget, would never stop seeing that empty uniform, standing, walking, reaching toward him. Charles went back to his barracks, tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. Harrison's uniform, empty, moving, impossible. That evening he reported for duty. His sergeant asked if he was ready to finish Building 7. Charles said yes. What else could he say? At 2300 hours, 11 p.m., he stood outside Building 7, key in hand, staring at the door. He didn't want to go in. Every instinct told him to walk away, to request reassignment, to refuse. But he was a soldier. He had orders. He had a job. Charles unlocked the door, turned on the lights, entered the building. Everything looked normal, exactly as he'd left it that morning. Rows of uniforms, organized shelves, nothing moving, nothing wrong. He walked to Section A, picked up his clipboard, started counting where he'd left off. 30 minutes passed. Nothing unusual happened, just normal inventory work. Charles started to relax. Maybe it had been a dream. Maybe he'd imagined everything. Maybe the stress of the war had finally gotten to him, and his mind had created something that wasn't there. Then the lights went out. All of them. Simultaneously. The building plunged into complete darkness. Charles grabbed his flashlight, turned it on. The beam cut through the blackness, illuminating rows of hanging uniforms, and standing at the end of the aisle, 20 feet away, was Harrison's uniform. Empty, upright, facing him. This time Charles didn't run, He was too terrified to move. Charles stood frozen, his flashlight beam locked on the empty uniform, his heart hammering so hard he could hear it. The uniform didn't move, just stood there in the darkness, empty sleeves hanging at its sides, empty boots planted on the floor. The name tag, Harrison, visible above the left breast pocket. "Why are you doing this?" Charles whispered, his voice barely audible. The uniform didn't respond, but slowly, very slowly, the right arm rose again, extended toward Charles. That same gesture, reaching, beckoning. Charles forced himself to breathe, to think. He was a soldier. He'd been trained to face danger. Whatever this was, hallucination, ghost, trick, he needed to understand it, not run from it. "Harrison," Charles said, louder now. "Private Harrison, is that you?" The extended arm lowered slightly, then rose again, like a nod. "Yes." "What do you want?" The uniform took a step forward, then another, walking slowly toward Charles, the boots making soft sounds on the concrete, sounds that shouldn't exist without feet inside them. Charles held his ground, every instinct screaming at him to run, but he stood still, watching, waiting. The uniform stopped 5 feet away, close enough that Charles could see the details, the stitching on the jacket, the buttons, the patches, everything exactly as it should be, except no person was wearing it. The right arm extended again, pointing now, not at Charles, past him, toward the corner of the building. Charles turned his head slightly, following the direction. The uniform was pointing at Section C, the far corner, the area Charles hadn't inventoried yet. "You want me to go there?" Charles asked. The arm moved, a gesture that might have been yes. Charles swallowed hard. "All right, I'll go look." He started walking towards Section C, his flashlight beam sweeping ahead of him. Behind him, he heard the footsteps. The uniform was following, keeping pace, not threatening, just accompanying. They reached Section C. Charles shined his light over the shelving units, uniforms hanging neatly, nothing obviously wrong. "What am I looking for?" he asked. The uniform moved past him, stood in front of a specific rack, the empty sleeve extended, pointing at one particular jacket. Charles approached, looked at the jacket. It seemed normal, standard issue, nothing special. Then he saw the name tag, Cooper. Another name he recognized, Private Cooper. Died 6 weeks ago. Sniper fire. His body had been shipped home. Charles looked at the uniform beside him, Harrison's uniform, then at the jacket on the rack, Cooper's jacket. "I don't understand," Charles said. "What does this mean?" The Harrison uniform didn't respond, but its arm moved, pointing to another jacket, 2 racks over. Charles walked to it, read the name tag, Williams. Williams, dead 3 months, artillery shell. Charles felt cold spreading through his chest, understanding beginning to form. "These are all dead soldiers," he said quietly. "These uniforms belong to men who died." The Harrison uniform stood motionless, but Charles felt confirmation somehow, like the uniform was saying yes. Charles looked around Section C. How many uniforms here belong to dead soldiers? Dozens? Hundreds? "Why are you showing me this?" Charles asked. The Harrison uniform turned, started walking toward a different section. Charles followed, his flashlight illuminating the path. They reached Section D. The uniform stopped in front of a large metal storage locker, pointed at it. Charles opened the locker. Inside were personal effects, letters, photographs, Small items that had belonged to soldiers, items that hadn't been sent home yet, items waiting to be processed. The uniform's arm extended, pointing at a specific box on the top shelf. Charles pulled it down, opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to the same person, Mrs. Harrison, Providence, Rhode Island. Letters from Private Harrison to his mother. Letters that had never been sent. Letters found among his effects after he died. Charles looked at the uniform standing beside him. "These are yours, your letters." The uniform stood motionless. "You want them sent home," Charles said, understanding now. "You want your mother to receive them." The uniform's arm lowered. Then the entire uniform seemed to relax somehow, like tension leaving a body, like relief. Charles held the box of letters. "I'll send them, I promise. I'll make sure they reach your mother." The Harrison uniform stood there for a moment longer. Then it began to move backward, slowly, deliberately, walking away from Charles. Charles watched as it retreated into the darkness, the flashlight beam following it. The uniform walked to the corner where Charles had first seen it, stopped, then simply collapsed. The jacket, pants, boots all fell to the floor in a heap. Just empty fabric, no longer standing, no longer animated. Charles stood alone in the darkness, holding a box of letters from a dead soldier to his mother, his hands shaking, his mind racing. This wasn't a haunting, not in the traditional sense. This was something else. Harrison hadn't been trying to scare him, hadn't been threatening. He'd been asking for help. The lights came back on, sudden, bright. The building returning to normal. Charles walked to the corner, looked at the pile of fabric on the floor. Harrison's uniform. Just cloth now. Nothing supernatural about it. He picked up the jacket, hung it back on the rack where it belonged. Then he carried the box of letters to his office, sat down at his desk, started filling out the paperwork to have them shipped to Mrs. Harrison in Rhode Island. As he worked, he thought about what had just happened, about what it meant. These uniforms, the ones that belonged to dead soldiers, were they all like Harrison's? Were they all trying to communicate something? Trying to complete some unfinished business? Charles looked at his inventory list. Section C, all those uniforms he'd seen. Cooper, Williams, how many others? He made a decision. Tomorrow he'd go through every uniform in Building 7, check every name tag, cross-reference with casualty lists, find every uniform that belonged to a dead soldier, and then he'd check if there were personal effects waiting to be sent home. Letters, photographs, anything that hadn't been processed yet. If Harrison could appear to ask for help, maybe others could too. Maybe that's what this was about. Soldiers who died far from home, who had things they needed to finish, messages they needed to send. The next morning, Charles requested permission to do a special inventory of Building 7. His sergeant approved it, assigned 2 other soldiers to help. For 3 days, Charles and his team went through every uniform in the building. Over 3,000 uniforms. Checking names, cross-referencing casualties. They found 127 uniforms that belonged to soldiers who'd been killed in action. 127 dead soldiers whose uniforms had been sent back but never properly processed. Charles created a special list, then went through the personal effects storage, looking for items that belonged to those 127 names. He found dozens, letters unmailed, photographs never sent home, personal items waiting in storage because the paperwork hadn't been completed. Charles processed everything, filled out forms, arranged shipments, made sure every letter, every photograph, every personal item made it to the families of the dead soldiers. It took 2 weeks, long hours, late nights, but Charles didn't mind. This felt important, more important than regular inventory work. During those 2 weeks, nothing unusual happened in Building 7. No uniforms standing by themselves. No footsteps in the dark. No arms reaching out. But Charles felt watched. Always. Like grateful eyes were observing his work, appreciating what he was doing. On December 28th, he processed the last shipment, the last box of letters, the last photograph. Everything had been sent home. That night, he did a final walkthrough of Building 7, checking his work, making sure nothing had been missed. The building felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted, like something that had been trapped was now free. Charles stood in the center aisle, looking at the rows of uniforms. "I hope you're at peace now," he said aloud. "All of you. I hope this helped." No response, just silence. But it felt like a peaceful silence, not the oppressive silence of that first night. Charles turned to leave, but something caught his eye, on the floor, near the door. Something that hadn't been there before. A single button, from a military jacket. Brass, polished, gleaming in the light. Charles picked it up, turned it over in his hand. On the back, scratched into the metal, were letters. H.M.H. Harry Maurice Harrison. Private Harrison's full name. A thank you, Charles thought. A way of saying goodbye. He put the button in his pocket, turned off the lights, locked the door behind him. He never saw the empty uniform again. Charles Monroe shipped home in February 1919. Returned to Ohio. Went back to his civilian life. Got a job. Got married. Had children. Normal life. But he kept Harrison's button. Kept it in a small box on his dresser. Never told his wife what it meant. Never explained where it came from. For 20 years, he didn't talk about Building 7. Didn't tell anyone what he'd experienced. It seemed too strange, too impossible. Who would believe him? But in 1939, something happened that made Charles reconsider his silence. He was reading the newspaper, an article about a supply depot in Georgia. The depot was being closed down, and workers reported strange occurrences in one of the storage buildings. Equipment moving by itself. Sounds of marching when no one was there. Uniforms found arranged in formations overnight. The article dismissed it as pranks, workers playing jokes, nothing serious. But Charles recognized the pattern. He knew what was really happening. He wrote a letter to the depot commander, explained what he'd experienced in France, suggested they check the personal effects storage, look for items belonging to deceased soldiers that hadn't been properly sent home. The commander wrote back 3 weeks later, thanked Charles for the suggestion, said they'd found a storage room full of unsent letters and photographs, over 50 soldiers worth, all from men who'd died during training accidents or illness, all waiting to be processed. Once they sent everything home, the strange occurrences stopped. Charles started paying attention after that, looking for similar stories, reading military publications, listening for reports of haunted supply depots or storage facilities. He found more than he expected. Across America and Europe, military storage facilities reported similar phenomena. Equipment moving, sounds with no source, items appearing in wrong places, always in buildings where uniforms or personal effects were stored, always connected to soldiers who died, always stopping once the personal effects were properly processed and sent to families. Charles realized he'd stumbled onto something, some kind of pattern, some connection between death, personal items, and unfinished business. He started writing letters to depot commanders, to military historians, explaining what he'd learned, suggesting they check their personal effects procedures, make sure nothing belonging to dead soldiers was left unsent. Some responded positively. Others dismissed him as a crank. But over the years, Charles heard from enough people to know he wasn't crazy. Others had experienced similar things. Others understood. In 1952, Charles was contacted by a researcher from Duke University, a professor studying paranormal phenomena. The professor had heard about Charles's experiences and wanted to interview him. Charles agreed, spent 3 hours telling his story in detail. The empty uniform, the letters, the button, everything. The professor recorded it all, took notes, asked questions, then explained his theory. "It's not really a ghost," the professor said. "Not in the traditional sense. It's more like an emotional imprint. Strong emotions, fear, love, desperation. They can leave traces, especially around personal objects. Letters someone wrote, uniforms someone died in. So Harrison's spirit wasn't really there. Maybe not his spirit, but his need was there. His desire to complete something, to make sure his letters reached his mother. That desire was so strong it manifested, found a way to communicate. And it happened because the letters were sitting there, unsent? Exactly. The combination of the uniform, which he died in, and the letters, which represented unfinished business, created a kind of nexus, a focal point for that emotional energy. Charles thought about that. It made a strange kind of sense. Not scientific exactly, but not completely supernatural either. Something in between. "What happened to the letters?" the professor asked. "The ones you sent to his mother?" "I don't know. I never followed up." The professor made a note. "Would you mind if I tried to find her? To ask if she received them?" "Go ahead. I'd like to know." 2 months later, the professor wrote back. He'd found Mrs. Harrison. She was still alive, living in the same house in Providence. She confirmed receiving the letters in January 1919. Said they arrived weeks after she'd been notified of her son's death. Said they were the greatest comfort she'd ever received. Her son's final words, his thoughts, his love for her. She'd kept every letter, reread them often. They'd helped her through her grief. The professor's letter included one more thing, a message from Mrs. Harrison. "Please tell Private Monroe thank you. Tell him he gave me my son back, even if only on paper. Tell him I'll never forget what he did." Charles cried when he read that. The Duke University professor, Dr. Martin Kelly, published a paper in 1953 about military hauntings. He included Charles's account along with 15 other similar cases from World War I and World War II. The paper was controversial. Some academics dismissed it as pseudoscience. Others found it compelling. The military largely ignored it, but the paper reached people who'd experienced similar things. Veterans, supply clerks, depot workers. They wrote to Dr. Kelly, shared their own stories. A pattern emerged, consistent across time and location. When personal effects of deceased soldiers weren't properly handled, weren't sent home, weren't inventoried, were lost or forgotten, strange things happened. Unexplained phenomena, usually in the buildings where those effects were stored. Objects moving, sounds of footsteps, cold spots, equipment malfunctioning, and occasionally, most dramatically, uniforms or equipment appearing to move by themselves. It always stopped once the personal effects were properly processed. Once letters were sent home. Once photographs were returned to families. Once the deceased soldier's final wishes were, in some sense, honored. Dr. Kelly called it unfinished business manifestation. The theory that strong emotional attachments to physical objects could create temporary paranormal phenomena. Not true ghosts, not spirits in the traditional sense, but something, some kind of energy or presence tied to unresolved needs. Charles became Dr. Kelly's primary consultant. They corresponded for years. Charles provided details, helped interview other witnesses, reviewed cases for similarities. Together, they documented over 100 incidents, all military-related, all involving deceased soldiers' belongings, all following the same pattern. In 1961, Dr. Kelly and Charles co-authored a book, The Unsent Letter: Military Hauntings and Unfinished Business. It was published by a small academic press, sold maybe 1,000 copies. But those who read it, particularly military personnel, found it fascinating. The book made specific recommendations. All personal effects of deceased service members should be inventoried within 48 hours of death notification. Letters, photographs, and personal items should be packaged and shipped to next of kin within 1 week. Storage facilities should be regularly audited to ensure no personal effects are overlooked or forgotten. Any reports of unusual phenomena in military storage facilities should prompt immediate personal effects audits. Some military bases adopted these procedures, others ignored them. But slowly, over years, the military's handling of deceased soldiers' personal effects improved. Fewer items were lost. Fewer letters went unsent. Processing times decreased. Families received their loved ones' belongings faster, and reports of hauntings in military storage facilities decreased dramatically. By 1970, such reports were rare. The improved procedures had largely solved the problem. Charles felt proud of that. He'd taken one terrifying experience and turned it into something useful. Something that helped families receive closure. That helped soldiers' final wishes be honored. In 1971, Charles was diagnosed with cancer. He had maybe 6 months. He called his son, John Monroe, and asked him to visit. John came immediately, flew from California to Ohio, spent a week with his father. On the 3rd day, Charles told him everything, the whole story. Building 7, the empty uniform, Harrison's letters, the button he'd kept for 50 years. John listened, didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened. When Charles finished, John asked, "Do you want me to do something with this story? Write it down? Share it?" "Not yet," Charles said. "Wait until I'm gone, then decide. But I wanted you to know. Wanted someone in the family to know what really happened." "Why are you telling me now?" Charles was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because I want you to understand something. What I experienced wasn't evil. It wasn't scary. Well, it was scary at first, but it wasn't malicious. Harrison wasn't trying to hurt me. He was asking for help. And you helped him. I tried. I think I did. I hope his mother got some comfort from those letters." "She did." Dr. Kelly confirmed that. "Good. That's good." Charles paused. "The point is, sometimes what seems frightening is just need, desperation. Someone trying to communicate in the only way they can." "You think Harrison's spirit was really there?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it was just energy. Emotion so strong it found a way to manifest. Does it matter? Either way, he needed help, and I could provide it." John nodded, understanding. Charles died 3 months later, June 1971. He was 79 years old. At his funeral, John found the button, the brass button with HMH scratched on the back. He kept it, put it in his own drawer, a reminder of his father's story. John Monroe kept his promise. He waited to share his father's story, waited for the right time, the right context. That time came in 2003. The Iraq War had started. Thousands of American soldiers deployed, and inevitably, some didn't come home. John started hearing stories from military personnel, from depot workers, from families. Stories about strange occurrences, equipment moving, sounds in empty storage rooms, Uniforms found in wrong places. The pattern was repeating. Modern warfare, modern military, but the same phenomenon, the same unfinished business. John contacted the Department of Defense, explained his father's experiences, referenced Dr. Kelly's research, offered to help. The DoD was skeptical at first, but they agreed to review their personal effects procedures, compare them to the recommendations in the unsent letter. They found gaps, processing delays, items sitting in storage for months, letters unmailed, photographs unsent. The DoD implemented new protocols, faster processing, better tracking, priority shipping for personal effects, and gradually, reports of unusual phenomena decreased. John also contacted military historians, paranormal researchers, anyone studying similar phenomena. He shared his father's story, provided documentation, offered context. One researcher, Dr. Sarah Chen from MIT, was particularly interested. She'd been studying what she called residual emotional energy, the idea that strong emotions could leave traces in physical locations or objects. Dr. Chen's theory aligned with Dr. Kelly's work from the 1950s, but she had better tools, better methods, more data. She studied 50 military storage facilities, interviewed hundreds of personnel, documented cases, looked for patterns. Her conclusion? There's definitely something happening. Whether you want to call it paranormal or psychological or something else, there's a consistent pattern. Personal effects of deceased soldiers, when left unprocessed, correlate strongly with reports of unusual phenomena. But is it actually ghosts? John asked during an interview. I can't answer that definitively, Dr. Chen said. But I can say this, it's real. The phenomena are real. Multiple witnesses, consistent reports, physical evidence in some cases. Something is happening. And it stops when the personal effects are sent home? Almost always. In 94% of cases we studied, once the personal effects were properly processed, sent to families, inventoried correctly, handled with respect, the phenomena stopped within days. So the solution is simple. The solution is simple. Respect the dead. Honor their belongings. Make sure their final items reach their families. Do that, and the hauntings stop. Dr. Chen published her findings in 2007. The study received significant attention. Military officials took notice. Personal effects procedures were further refined. By 2010, reports of military storage facility hauntings had dropped to nearly zero. The improved procedures were working. John felt his father would be proud. Charles's terrifying experience in Building 7 had led to this. Better procedures, faster processing, families receiving closure more quickly, and fewer empty uniforms standing in dark warehouses. Fewer desperate attempts to communicate. Fewer soldiers' final needs going unmet. In 2015, John was contacted by a documentary filmmaker. She wanted to make a film about military hauntings. Wanted to include Charles's story. John agreed. The documentary, The Empty Uniform, Stories of Military Hauntings, premiered in 2016. It included interviews with John, footage of old supply depots, testimonies from other witnesses, and Dr. Chen's research. The film was well received, won several awards, brought attention to the importance of proper personal effects handling. But more importantly, it helped families. Families who'd lost soldiers, who'd wondered why personal items took so long to arrive, who'd worried their loved ones were forgotten. The documentary explained the process, showed the care that went into handling deceased soldiers' belongings, emphasized that delays weren't from neglect, but from the complexity of the system. It brought comfort, understanding, peace. John received dozens of letters from families, thanking him for sharing his father's story, for helping them understand. One letter stood out, from a woman in Rhode Island. She identified herself as Harrison's great-niece. "My great-grandmother, Harrison's mother, died in 1965, she wrote. But I heard stories about her son, about the letters that arrived after his death, about how much they meant to her. She kept them until she died, left them to my grandmother, who left them to my mother, who showed them to me. Those letters were everything to her. They helped her heal. They proved her son had been thinking of her, that he'd loved her, that even in war, even facing death, he'd wanted her to know. Please tell your father's story. Tell people what he did. How one act of kindness, sending those letters home, changed everything for a grieving mother. Harry Harrison was a good man. Your father helped prove that, helped his mother know that. We'll never forget." John kept that letter, framed it, hung it in his office. A reminder that sometimes the scariest experiences lead to the most meaningful outcomes. In 2018, exactly 100 years after Charles's experience, John received an unexpected invitation. The French government was hosting a World War I commemoration. They'd restored several historical military sites, including Supply Depot 12, Building 7, the uniform storage building where Charles had encountered the empty uniform, still stood. It had been converted into a museum, part of a larger complex honoring American soldiers who'd served in France. The French government invited families of soldiers who'd worked at the depot, asked them to attend the opening ceremony. John decided to go, brought his wife and daughter, wanted to see the place where his father's story had happened. They arrived in northern France in November. The weather was cold, gray skies, similar to how Charles had described it. The depot had been carefully restored, most buildings converted to museum exhibits. Building 7 was the centerpiece. The storage museum, life behind the lines. John walked through the building, his heart racing. This was where it had happened, where Charles had seen Harrison's uniform, where everything had begun. The building looked different now, clean, well lit. Display cases showing uniforms from the era, information panels explaining supply operations, video screens showing historical footage. But the basic structure was the same. The high ceilings, the concrete floors, the long aisles between shelving units. John could imagine it. The building dark, empty. A young soldier working alone, then seeing something impossible. During the opening ceremony, John was asked to speak. He hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't expected to address the crowd. But standing in Building 7, surrounded by restored uniforms and historical artifacts, he felt compelled to share. "My father, Private Charles Monroe, worked in this building in December 1918, he began. He experienced something here, something he never fully understood, something that changed his life." John told the story, the empty uniform, the letters, the button, the years of research and advocacy that followed. The crowd listened in silence. Some looked skeptical, others seemed moved. When he finished, an elderly French woman approached. She spoke limited English, but through a translator she told her story. "My grandfather worked here too," she said, "after the Americans left. During the closure, he told similar stories, about uniforms that moved, about cold spots, about sounds with no source. Did he know what caused it? He said it was the soldiers, the ones who died. He said they were still here, still trying to go home. He respected them, always spoke kindly about them. He said they weren't trying to frighten anyone. They were just lost. John felt chills. Independent confirmation from someone who couldn't have known Charles's story. After the ceremony, the museum director gave John a private tour of the archives. They'd found records from 1918, including Charles's inventory reports. There, in neat handwriting, Charles had documented his work, the uniforms he'd processed, the personal effects he'd shipped home. The director showed John one particular entry. December 15th, 1918. A note in the margin. 127 uniforms belonging to KIA soldiers identified. Personal effects located and processed for shipment home. Your father was thorough, the director said. These records are remarkable. Most depots didn't keep such detailed documentation. John smiled. He was a good soldier and a good man. The director pulled out another document, a letter, yellowed with age, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. We found this in the building's foundation. During renovation, it was hidden in a wall cavity. No envelope, no signature, but dated December 28, 1918. John read the letter. It was written in careful handwriting. To whoever finds this, I don't know if anyone will believe what happened here. I'm not sure I believe it myself, but I want to record it so someone knows. The soldiers who died in this war, their belongings, their letters, their final thoughts. These things matter. They deserve respect. They deserve to reach their families. I learned that from Private Harrison, or from his uniform, or from whatever it was I saw in this building. I'm not afraid anymore. I understand now. It wasn't a haunting. It was a reminder that every soldier is a person. Every person has family. Every family deserves closure. I hope I did right by them. I hope the letters reached their destinations. I hope I honored their memory. If you're reading this, you're probably wondering if I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw, and I know what I did. And I'm glad I did it. Remember the dead. Honor their wishes. Send their letters home. Charles Monroe, Private, U.S. Army. December 28, 1918. John's eyes filled with tears. His father had left this, a message across a century. Can I have a copy? He asked. You can have the original, the director said. It belongs to your family. John took the letter, held it carefully. His father's words, his father's witness, preserved for 100 years, finally found. John Monroe returned to America with his father's letter. He had it professionally preserved, framed, hung it in his home office. But he also scanned it, shared it online, posted it with his father's story. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of comments, shares, messages from veterans, families, historians, paranormal enthusiasts. Some dismissed it, called it fiction, said no such thing could happen. But many more believed, or wanted to believe, or had experienced similar things themselves. A retired Army supply sergeant wrote, I worked depot storage for 20 years. I saw things I can't explain. This story makes sense of them. A Gold Star mother wrote, My son died in Afghanistan. His personal effects took 6 months to reach me. 6 months of waiting, wondering. This story helps me understand why, and helps me forgive. A paranormal researcher wrote, This is the most credible military haunting account I've ever read. The documentation, the witnesses, the pattern, it's all there. But the most meaningful response came from a genealogist in Rhode Island. She'd been researching the Harrison family. She'd found Harry Harrison's letters to his mother, the actual letters Charles had sent home in December 1918. "The family preserved them," she wrote. "They're in the Rhode Island Historical Society archives now, donated by Harrison's sister in 1979. I've read them. They're beautiful, full of love, hope, humor. Everything a mother would want to remember about her son. Your father gave that family the greatest gift, not just the letters, but the proof that Harry died thinking of them, that even in his final days, they were in his thoughts." The letters mention this specifically. In one, dated 2 days before he died, Harry writes, "Tell Charles if anything happens to me, make sure you get these letters. They're the only thing I have to leave you." Your father kept that promise, even though Harry never got to ask him directly, even though it required experiencing something terrifying. He kept that promise. John shared this information. The story spread further. History classes used it. Military ethics courses discussed it. Paranormal studies cited it. Charles Monroe's experience, one night in a cold warehouse in France, had become something larger. A lesson about duty, respect, remembrance, and the power of unfinished business. In 2023, the U.S. Army formally adopted the Monroe Protocol for handling deceased service members' personal effects. Named in honor of Charles Monroe, the protocol emphasized speed, respect, and care. Every item tracked, every letter delivered, every photograph sent home. No soldier's belongings would be forgotten or lost. John attended the announcement ceremony at the Pentagon. A plaque was unveiled, honoring his father's service and advocacy. Private Charles Monroe's actions in December 1918 remind us that logistics isn't just about moving equipment, the Army Chief of Staff said. It's about caring for people, even after they're gone. Especially after they're gone. His commitment to ensuring fallen soldiers' personal effects reached their families set a standard we still strive to meet. The Monroe Protocol formalizes that commitment. It ensures no soldier will be forgotten. No letter will go undelivered. No family will wait unnecessarily for their loved one's final belongings. John thought his father would have been embarrassed by the attention. Charles had always been modest, always deflected praise. But John knew he'd be proud. Proud that one frightening experience had led to meaningful change, that his actions had helped countless families find closure. After the ceremony, John visited Arlington National Cemetery, found a quiet spot overlooking the rows of white headstones. He pulled out the brass button, the one his father had kept for 50 years, the one with HMH scratched on the back. "I think you'd be happy, Dad," John said quietly. "Your story helped people, still helping people. That's all you ever wanted." He thought about Building 7, about the empty uniform, about Harrison trying desperately to communicate, about Charles, terrified but determined, finding a way to help. Was it really a ghost? Was it something supernatural? Or was it, as Dr. Kelly had theorized, just emotional energy finding a way to manifest? John didn't know, wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was that Charles had responded with compassion instead of fear, had chosen to help instead of run, had turned a terrifying experience into meaningful action. That was the real story, not the haunting, the humanity. John returned the button to his pocket, stood up, started walking back to his car. Behind him, if he'd been listening carefully, he might have heard something. The faint sound of footsteps, heavy boots on grass, walking away, fading into silence. But John didn't hear it, didn't need to. Some stories end not with answers, but with peace, with the knowledge that something needed was finally done. that someone forgotten was finally remembered. That's how this story ends. Not with fear or mystery or unanswered questions, but with letters delivered, promises kept, and soldiers, long dead but not forgotten, finally at rest. The empty uniform stands no more. The storage building is now a museum. The letters reach their destination, and somewhere, in some way we can't quite understand, Private Harry Maurice Harrison is at peace. Thanks for listening, and if you ever find yourself in a military storage facility late at night and you see something that shouldn't be there, something standing where nothing should stand, don't run. Ask what it needs. Ask how you can help. Because sometimes, the dead aren't trying to frighten us. They're just asking us to remember.